Number one, like if you can find a way to accept your situation, you are going to be more inclined to show up for yourself and do what you need to do to fully commit to your recovery, whatever that means to you. Being in an injury is kind of like a blessing too, where it forces you to look inward and do the hard work that most people aren't willing to do. But as a result, you start seeing that positive effects from, an instrument perspective. Taking care of your mental and physical health have huge benefits to your playing. And I think it's an unexplored area that a lot of people aren't willing to explore, because unless you're in an injury, people don't really like to focus on these things because it's really difficult, because it requires you to look inward, and that can be really hard for a lot of people. Whoever is going through an injury, you can overcome it. You can. There is no injury that is too severe that you can't overcome.
All right, welcome back to the show, everybody. Today I wanted to invite somebody who I came across while researching things for my own injury recovery a couple of months back. He has been able to use his experience in injury as a brass musician to help several other musicians and create his own coaching platform to help these musicians get through their own injury recovery and become functioning musicians again. His platform is called The Functional Musician. And like I said, he has been able to help many, many others in their path to recovery. And so without further ado, Austin Pansener, welcome to the show.
Hey, Clark, thanks for having me. Excited to see where this conversation takes us today.
Me too. I really was excited to get your response to my email, because as I was digging more into your stuff, I was excited because of the holistic approach that you take to recovery, something that as a trumpet player I hadn't considered, because my injury was just to a very small part of my body, but it really opened my eyes to how all-inclusive recovery for a musician can really be. And so while we get started, why don't you just kind of give your story of your injury and how that led to what you're doing now.
Yeah, sure. So I had a lot of injuries that I developed over the years. I was a tenor trombone player, and I was in grad school at Indiana University, and I started pursuing a performance diploma, and a lot of opportunities and things kind of just fell my way, where I decided to switch to bass trombone. And I found myself playing a ridiculous amount and essentially overusing my embouchure and overusing my body as well. I was also hitting the gym. I was a gym nut. I followed Athlete X for a long time, and their workouts are really intense. I loved how it made me feel, but in combination with the practicing, my body and eventually my embouchure just kind of gave in. And the first experience that I had is I blew out my left forearm. I didn't have a proper ergonomic grip for my instrument, so I was relying on my wrist and my forearm to hold the weight of my instrument for 6 to 8, sometimes more hours a day, depending on how many rehearsals or what I had going on. And that kind of led me down. That was kind of like that first injury that kind of led me down that 3-year path of destruction. But basically, as I recovered and as I switched over, the tension that I accumulated in my body and the unhealthy habits that I had in my life and just the way I took care of myself mentally and physically finally caught up to me. And I started developing chronic pain, my shoulders and my upper back, eventually spread to my chest. I had so much tension and tightness in my upper body that I couldn't really take a full breath without feeling pain.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And it was really just someone would be like, take an easy breath. And I would be like, and it hurt. It was like a pain. And then that eventually led to, I transitioned into my doctoral degree, it kind of all culminated into this event on my first doctoral recital where I developed an embouchure injury, and I developed more physical injuries in my body that discouraged me and just kind of like put me back to square one, essentially. And I'm glad that you mentioned holistic health, because that's kind of how my recovery journey took me there, So I was in chronic pain. I didn't pass my recital. I couldn't get through it. After the first piece, I had no sensation in my lips. I was in a huge fight or flight mode to the point where my heart rate, I wish I would have like worn an Apple Watch then to see what my heart rate would have been, but it felt pretty high, from then on. And I went to doctors, told me take time off, take rest. I was in some unhealthy relationships at the time. I wasn't in the best environment at IU, just because it's a highly competitive musical school. And although I had really great support structure with a friend and some faculty and family, of course, it's still very competitive. And being in a competitive environment still has an underlying tone of toxicity if you're someone who wants to be competitive but is inhibited by various reasons. For me, it was, the physical limitations that really got to me. But I went to a couple doctors. They were like, maybe you should consider something else. Maybe you should, look for other fields. Didn't like that answer.
No, sir.
So, no, sir. Yeah. Went to a couple of physical therapists, went to a chiropractor I saw pretty regularly for about 3 years, and massage therapy, developed a yoga practice for a couple of years, and switched up my lifting routine. And generally I was just trying to stay healthy, but I kept falling back into my injury cycle and nothing was really working. And it got to the point where I was just really depressed, and music wasn't bringing me joy anymore. I couldn't listen to it because part of me really believed I deserved to be making music too. That's all I wanted to do. So, I try to support my friends and my colleagues the best I can, but most concert I would go to, it would just be so heartbreaking that I wanted to do, make music too, and I physically couldn't. That I started to isolate myself from everybody and start to explore other options. And that's what, kind of naturally led me down like this personal trainer rabbit hole, since I spent a lot of time in the gym just to kind of get away from that environment. And, it's really quite refreshing mentally to work out or do cardio or just move your body. So I explored that and got a couple of certifications, worked in the gym a little bit, and started, a couple of musician friends asking for lessons here and there in the gym, so we do workouts together, and, just taking care of myself and starting to actually assess my lifestyle and my life habits and my old practice habits and the stories I was telling myself and, the type of mindset I had. All of these things, I realized, wow, like I was really hard on myself. Wow. Turns out, getting a couple of beers every night for a couple of years because the bar's right across the street from the music school isn't the best for my health either. Oh, it turns out that I actually need sleep and, all
Imagine
of these
that, right?
things that, yeah, imagine that. It's like, and we are taught, these are, things that are kind of like duh moments, right? People are like, duh, you gotta get sleep. Duh, you gotta take care of yourself. You gotta hydrate. You gotta move. You gotta, take care of yourself. But when you're in grad school or even undergrad, the amount of expectations, the amount of coursework, the amount of load and studying and practice and performing and expectations demanded on students is pretty unrealistic. And, that caught up to me. And so as I started to evaluate and reassess, I started to just kind of switch things up and focus on building a healthier lifestyle. And within 3 to 6 months, the tension started going away. I started feeling better. I started sleeping better. Breathing became easier. Moving became easier. I started having, I think I said more energy already, but long story short, I started to practice again, and I could practice without pain. I could actually take a full breath. I could take a relaxed full breath, and it felt really good. And that's what kind of began my recovery story was, I saw all these medical professionals, and they were helpful. They were, I'm not going to lie, but ultimately the biggest thing that was significant for me was taking accountability for my own health and realizing that it's not just one thing that was causing my injuries. It wasn't just one factor. It was the accumulation of all of these different factors, and it took a while to kind of get back on track. But once I started seeing these benefits, and once I started seeing the benefits that other people were experiencing through this type of work, I knew that regardless of where trombone would take me, like this was what I was meant to do, if that makes sense.
It makes perfect sense, man. If anybody's not watching the video, I'm just been like headbanging so much. I'm nodding so much in agreement to what he's been saying, because you guys, like, the biggest thing I think we all learn, for those of us going through injury recovery, is that really showing up for ourselves is the greatest way that we can recover in our health, in all facets of our health, physical, emotional, mental, social, even. It's really when we realize that our recovery becomes an investment, and our, in ourselves, right? And then our musicianship also becomes an investment in ourselves. And so there's so much that I want to talk to you about your experience, because I see a lot of parallels with my own experience with injury, and recovery. But I want to talk about something that you referenced kind of at the beginning of what you were saying, was when you were talking about when you got to grad school, or maybe you said your undergrad, but you have all these opportunities and expectations. And I think a lot of us, depending on how we, our upbringing, our musical upbringing before we get to college, because a lot of my audience are college music students, we kind of get to college and there's all these opportunities, right? Especially at a school like IU, right? There's all these opportunities, all these performing groups that, for me, from my experience, I had never experienced. I had never had an opportunity to be in. And so I always use the analogy of I'm like a kid in a candy store, right? And just always wanting to take every opportunity that's come to me. And that can lead to, like you were saying, some unhealthy practices in our lifestyle, right? And so kind of my first question is, for those of us who are in that situation or have been in that situation, what would be your advice, or what was your experience in learning how to not necessarily say no to opportunities, but to, I guess, load up your plate in a healthy way?
Yeah. Oh man. Powerful and loaded question. And I will be completely candid. Like in grad school, I didn't have a healthy load. That was something I learned post-COVID, was really how to balance schedule. COVID was actually a blessing for me in a lot of ways, where it made me step back and kind of reassess how to, reprioritize the things, in my life that I needed to have balance. And, if I had to do it all over again, something I learned the hard way is that when you're heading into a semester and you have all of these opportunities, kind of reflecting on the past semesters, I would say is step one. If you had a semester that didn't go well, why didn't it go well? What was your course load like? If it was the first time that you were in two ensembles, regardless of whether you're in your undergrad or graduate degree, how did you manage that? How did you feel at the end of the semester? Did you feel really grateful for those opportunities? Did you feel like you learned a lot? Were you exposed to a lot of different musical scenarios that you've never been exposed to? Or were you burnt out? Were you wishing that summer was here? Were you wishing you were somewhere else? Were you not necessarily present at the rehearsals and the performances? And that can kind of dictate whether or not you can handle two ensembles in that semester, or different areas you can adjust, because there are just so many areas of life when you're a student that, I'm not sure that achieving balance is necessarily the goal, but maybe more just kind of reassessing what your priorities are on a semester basis, and also dividing the semester into little categories of what those priorities are. For example, like, if you were in 2 classes or 3 classes, chances are each one of those classes, assignments aren't due all the same day. Maybe there will be some overlap, of course, but like, chances are projects are going to be spread out across those 3 classes, except for the end of the semester. We can always assume the end of the semester, finals, that's a lot of projects due, a lot of exams, a lot of studying, etc. But just kind of taking base and tallying up at the end of the semester what you learned and what you learned about yourself and how you manage that current load. And then when you go in the forward in the next semester, just kind of asking yourself what you can handle, what type of energy you want to have that semester, and how you want to show up as a student, and how you want to show up in your education. I mean, do you want to be someone that's running around all the time doing stuff, having an extremely busy schedule and not a lot of free time? Some people love that. Or are you someone that values time for yourself, reflection time to do maybe hobbies or interests that you have, or go to a club sport, or go to a football game, and explore some of the student life outside of, the music school. And for a school like IU, that's a D1 school, there's a lot you can do, There's so much, that's too much, which is why I ended up staying for 8 years. Like, it's so much, after 2 years, it went by in the blink of an eye, and I was like, there's just so much more I want to do here. And I was a Hoosier, so that made sense, but I digress. So I would say just kind of assessing your schedule and asking yourself how you want to show up, because I hear all these stories about people taking 20 credits so they can graduate a year early or graduate a semester early, but learning takes time, and we also need time to process. And, I found with a lot of the people I work with who just come out of college, the people that I work with the most are the people that ignored their health or didn't have time, quote unquote, to focus on their health. Really, it just wasn't a priority. They focused on other things, that they started seeing the cumulative effects of that. Mm-hmm. So I would say being honest with yourself and asking yourself those questions, I think, is a great place to start.
That's great. I think anybody who's working on that part of their life needs to go rewind the last 5 minutes and listen again. And that's the thing that I've learned is just like, as my thing is, as I've learned is that as the quality of your overall life goes up, your musicianship goes up. Because before my injury, I was practicing more than I should have on a time from a time standpoint, and didn't have any other time for the rest of my life, and it became kind of a trap. Burnout was starting to happen, and then my injury occurred. But what I've noticed is that and this is for everyone out there, even if you're not even going through an injury, is as you focus on the other parts of your life and invest time and energy into the other parts of your life that bring meaning, as well as music, your musicianship is going to go up. You're going to have more effective practice sessions. And I'm sure you'd agree, like, as you worked on those other parts of your life, tell me, like, did your efficiency in your practicing and your performance and effectiveness go up? Like, what was your experience with that?
Oh yeah, I mean, it's still a work in progress. I'm a huge, believer in practicing what you preach, and there are rough days and there are great days, but I find that when I'm consistent and I'm really on top of my mental and physical health and spiritual health too, whatever that means to you, trombone is a blessing. It's so much fun, and the efficiency, goes up. Your ability to focus, more importantly, the ability to just relax and breathe and really embrace whatever it is you're doing in that moment. Mm-hmm. You're not distracted by tension. You're not distracted by pain. You're not, worried about fear. You're not worried about like, oh, what if this happens? Oh, what if I can't make it through this etude? You're just, I'm going to make music. I'm going to focus on this. I'm going to focus on this. It's, it's a different way of showing up for yourself, like you talked about earlier, that is really powerful, and not a lot of people realize, and something that I'm really trying to get the message out, with my audience, or really any musician, is that taking care of your mental and physical health have huge benefits to your playing. And I think it's an unexplored area that a lot of people aren't willing to explore, because unless you're in an injury, people don't really like to focus on these things, because it's really difficult, because it requires you to look inward, and that can be really hard for a lot of people. So being in an injury is kind of like a blessing too, where it forces you to look inward and do the hard work that most people aren't willing to do. But as a result, you start seeing that positive effects from, an instrument perspective. So yeah, I'm just curious, Clark, like what kinds of benefits did you notice as you started showing up for yourself in other areas of life?
Well, it was just interesting for me as I not only focused on ways, to have meaningful experiences with music I'm still not able to play a ton right now on the trumpet, but as I'm learning to find meaning in music and making music through like learning how to play the piano, or I started going to the gym again and making time for my social life. I've noticed that when I came back to the horn, on the periods that I've been able to come back to the horn, I have an exponential growth. Like I'm primarily a jazz musician, and the work that I put in off the horn, I come back, even though I haven't touched the horn right in a long time, the work that I've done off it has translated to the music, and not only just from like from that specific part of my life, but my viewpoint, my mindset about my growth as a musician. I'm much more trusting. The reason why I call this show Trust the Process is because I'm learning to trust the process, and I'm hoping that people are learning that as well as they listen to the show, right? Because as we do that, that's how we grow. You can't, like the logo for my show is a plant growing, right? You can't rush that, and you can't rush injury recovery, and you also can't rush your growth as a musician. That's what I tried to do. When we try to do that, that's when pain starts setting in, physical and otherwise.
Yeah,
So,
man, I love that so much. Both the logo and the name. Trust the process. It's beautiful.
Yeah, it's kind of been my mantra for the last year and a half, and will continue to be so. It's just the other thing that I think I've learned, and I talk about this in other episodes, is the principle of investment, because we always think of that as a money principle, and it's probably one that we all should look into from that perspective. But I don't think musicians really understand the principle of investing in oneself, right? The principle of like you spend a little bit of time off the horn. Like if we're using the example of like in the practice room, if you spend a little time off the horn, if things aren't working right, to do stretching or, breathing exercises, or doing, getting curious about what other things will activate that part of your musicianship that you're working on. That time spent off the horn when you're not just repping a passage or an excerpt or whatever, that's going to translate to more growth and more return on that time than if you had just tried to beat that, passage or whatever you're working on into the ground. And that's what I've noticed, is that as we learn to invest our time in other things, our return on our musicianship actually goes up a lot. So.
Yeah. And I totally agree. And I think also the more you invest in yourself, the more confidence you have in yourself with whatever area that might be, whether it's self-development, education, continuing education, hiring a coach, like going to a professional or a teacher, all of those things are ways to invest in yourself. Even, a degree is an investment in yourself as well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's all, we're always putting money in the bank, for our future self. And so have you seen this, like teaching these principles to your clients, of showing up for yourself and things like that? How has that kind of been received? Like, what are the prevailing mindsets that your clients kind of show up with? And then how does that change and affect them as you continue to work with them in that regard?
Right. Yeah. Also a deep and loaded question. And short story, it depends. I mean, we all have emotional baggage, and experiences with injuries can be extremely traumatic.
Sure.
And there are a lot of variables and factors that can increase that level of trauma for someone. And it's going to be, completely dependent on someone's injury. But I would say a common mindset I see is a fear of re-injury. That's a big one. Not having confidence in themselves, some level of imposter syndrome, some deep rooted belief that the injury is going to last forever, or another belief that they're never going to be able to make music a profession because of their injury. And really the list goes on. But I would say those are the common ones. And I've learned through being in this field and working with particular personality styles that it's more effective, at least with the work that I do, to identify these limiting beliefs, is what I call them, limiting beliefs, and find ways to acknowledge them, accept them, and then kind of reframe beliefs that we want to have moving forward. And something actually I do say to every one of my clients ad nauseum is, number one, trust the process. So hashtag podcast title. And number two, show up for yourself. I always say that. I'm like, at the end of the day, like, if you can ask yourself, did I show up for myself today with my health and wellness and my recovery? And if you said yes, great job. It doesn't matter what you did that day. It doesn't matter if you did 5 minutes of movement when you wanted to do 30. If you can say yes at the end of the day, it's a win. Because it's a process, right? It goes up and down, it ebbs and flows. But if you say no, then you got to start asking yourself, well, what would I have done differently? What's holding me back? What beliefs do I have that are affecting my ability to show up for myself? And there have been some moments where people's beliefs are so ingrained that it can inhibit them from performing simple tasks that are extremely important in their recovery. So when I work with someone, we start trying to develop those beliefs. We start working through those, and we start kind of unpacking that to see where those beliefs developed, and finding ways through journaling, through affirmation practice. Depending on the personality style, I may incorporate meditation. I'm also a huge believer in breathing exercises done in a particular way, and we have conversations about it pretty regularly until the conversations and way they talk starts to indicate that these beliefs are starting to shift towards a direction that they can start taking control of the thought, not control of the thoughts in their head, but they are aware of the thoughts that are in their head, and they're able to redirect it in a productive and positive way. One that at the end of the day will help them show up for themselves, as opposed to doom scrolling or watching Netflix or doing something that encourages them to isolate or disassociate from their situation, so to speak. Does that make sense?
That makes absolute sense. And I would say that goes for everyone not even just going through injury, all the musicians and everyone in general. I think all those practices, they're so ingrained in all the mindsets that you've mentioned, I think, are so ingrained in our culture, and especially in the music schools and in the collegiate and professional world. And so I think everything you said is just spot on. It makes total sense. These are all practices that you can invest in yourself,
Right.
To see.
And I'll just say one last thing about that too. And it's not that like we don't feel these things too.
Sure.
I definitely feel some level of imposter syndrome. Fears always come up. You're going to have challenges and setbacks, but it's how you face them, and developing like a toolbox of different skills and techniques you can use to help you through those situations, so the fears don't become beliefs, or the challenges that you experience don't completely hit you off the path that you want to pursue or that you want to explore. It's about facing them in a really productive and, I think, healthy way, as opposed to kind of playing victim to the thoughts that are in our head, if that makes sense. Just as like a side caveat.
No, yeah, definitely. That's a whole nother podcast episode. I feel like we could
Oh,
explore,
dude. Yeah.
couple
No
podcast
kidding.
episodes. Real quick, I just wanted to pick your brain about something that you've talked about on other audios that I've heard that you've been on, and a little bit on your website, which I'll attach in the show notes. But just want to get your take, especially since you have gone, you're finishing up at IU. What you've observed about maybe what can change, because there's educators that are going to be listening to this podcast. What culture shifts need to happen, and especially in like load. I know that's a big conversation at my school at Brigham Young University, with ensembles and things like that, just so that injuries and these unhealthy mindsets could become less of an issue. Just wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Whew. Yeah. I don't know if I have a good answer. That's a pretty wide systemic issue, I think. And some schools are better than others. Well, as a whole, the available resources for musician health and wellness just across the board in the United States, institution to institution, is not consistent. And it's also, I would argue, not adequate enough to support the students that are pursuing music, both from an education, performance, composition, really any music students. And I think that as teachers, we do have a responsibility. And gosh, dude, it's such a hard question because there's so many angles, but
yeah.
Like the institution wise, like they need to provide resources to the students, both, having health and wellness resources for injured musicians, psychological services, mental health services, as well as physical therapists, that are working with the school. And there are a lot of ways that can accomplish that. And some schools like IU are doing that. On the other hand, too, there aren't a lot of musician health and wellness courses that are required at most schools. And educating musicians on ear health, on protecting their ears during loud concerts and the sounds that can damage the eardrums, what physical injuries are, how tension develops, and also offering different courses that students can explore to reduce that tension. There are a lot of Alexander technique classes and yoga classes that are packaged as injury prevention for musicians, but that's only one factor in a multifactorial world that contributes to the perception of pain and overuse injuries that I would argue that's not adequate enough either. It's a step in the right direction, but there's still, many other things that we need to start exploring there. And to answer your question from like a teacher perspective, that's also a loaded question because there are a wide range of teachers, wide range of different personality styles. But I would say the first step is always awareness and education. Are the teachers educated around the different health resources available at that university? Do they have a referral service or a referral network of, professionals that they can refer their students out to if they don't know the answer? I also think this kind of goes with, a responsibility too of like something I live by in my work is, number one is do no harm when I'm working with someone. So making sure that whatever you are working on with a student, that you are careful not to put them down the wrong path. And obviously no one has malicious intent if they're an educator. Yeah, right. But that goes without saying that a lot of the stuff that's taught in brass pedagogy, for example, like belly breathing, that has some severe ramifications for certain body types. It really does. So educating yourself on that, if that's something that you happen to come across, rather than just discredit that, kind of having a curiosity and a growth mindset with that can be really helpful. But there really aren't a lot of resources available to teachers to teach these types of things for students, which is also another gap that can be filled.
Yeah, it's a loaded question. And that's, like I said, we could probably create, 10 more podcast episodes just off of the topics we've discussed already.
And I feel like I completely struck out on that question too, because it's just like there are so many factors that play an effect to that. No,
No, it's you said something on another show that just really got me thinking. Was I think you said something like we are athletes of small muscles, or something like that. And
Small muscle athletes, yeah.
yeah, and it just got me thinking of like the similarities between us as musicians and athletes, and also the differences, but how athletes are protected even by their institutions. And there's that kind of that's not quite there for musicians quite yet. And so I think what you were talking about actually does address that quite well of at least what we can do now without creating like an institutional overhaul, I think.
Yeah.
Things like that.
And that also, yeah, I mean, that's great. And also, I mean, institutions are businesses too. So it's, you have that boundary as well. And if we've learned anything in America about how businesses treat their employees, most of them don't do a great job, unfortunately.
Yeah.
In my opinion.
No, yeah, it's true. So 2 questions left as we're wrapping up. I first of all, just thank you again for being willing to do this. Like, I think this is going to bless and help so many musicians, and hopefully show them that you are a resource for them as well in their own injury recovery. That's my biggest hope with this episode. But 2 last questions. You go back to whenever this started for you, right before you started like getting injured. And you are given the choice to go down this path or to not. To have, basically, was your injury worth it?
That's a great question. And I would definitely do things differently. 110%. But yeah, the injury was worth it. And, one of the hardest things for musicians to accept, myself included, it took me like a long time to accept my injury, actually accept it. And I've come to terms with it, and I'm really grateful for the journey because now I'm helping other musicians overcome injuries. I'm impacting this community in a way I never thought possible. And I'm really grateful for that. And, something that I actually was deeply embedded within me all the way from freshman year of undergrad was like, I was actually really torn from being just a trombonist because I wanted to help people. And I would always be like, why the heck am I practicing when I could be helping other people? I always thought it was really selfish of me. And that's my mental baggage with it. But the injury in a way allowed me to find a way to give back and help other people. So I feel more fulfilled. I feel so much more fulfilled. And also I have pretty bad ADHD that I'm still learning to navigate. And I find myself wanting to switch focus on different things quite a bit. And I can also focus. One of my superpowers is I can focus on something for a very long time. You give me a 20,000 piece Lego set, I will finish it from start to finish, no breaks, like it will happen. So I can be very focused, but I can also get burnt out really quickly if I focus too much on one thing. So I have another avenue, to jump to, and it keeps things fresh. But from a playing perspective, and I was reflecting on this earlier this week, I am a better player than I was before my injury, 100%. And although I still have a long way to go, being injured for any amount of time sets you back mentally and physically, especially on the horn. And then you have like the mindset of playing catch up. But once you accept your injury, that you kind of let that go. And I'm really happy with where the horn has been taking me and the changes that I've made. And I've developed more confidence in my playing and my ability to step into a professional ensemble and blend and support whoever I need to or play whatever concert that I need to. And again, everything's always a learning experience. Am I perfect? Heck no. Do I have things I'm trying to improve on every day? Yes. But if I never would have gone down that path, I don't think I would be the player, the coach, or even the person that I am today. So I would not change a thing, and I would, there were many, many hard lessons that I needed to learn and many lessons that I still will, but Ultimately, if I could give anybody one piece of advice, I know maybe that was your last question. Not really sure.
That was my last question.
Okay, cool.
You read my mind.
Well, two pieces of advice. Number one, like if you can find a way to accept your situation, you are going to be more inclined to show up for yourself and do what you need to do to fully commit to your recovery, whatever that means to you. I highly recommend talking to a therapist. Therapy is a fantastic tool. Not all therapists are like teachers, and physical therapists and doctors. Not everybody's going to be a good fit for you. You do have to hunt around, and it does have to be a good fit. But if you can accept your situation, you're always going to be looking for that short-term solution. And we really want to think broader, more holistically, more long-term, just because music is a long-term career path. It's a long-term art form that takes years and years and years to refine and master. And I would also say, last thing is that whoever is going through an injury, like you can overcome it. You can. There is no injury that is too severe that you can't overcome. And I would say, if you can find a way to accept it, if you can find a way to talk to someone, I think that's a good first step to going down that path towards recovery that a lot of us are scared to navigate naturally, just because, as you said, it's something that's not often talked about in our world, and we don't have a lot of resources available, and it's so misunderstood from the medical professional side and also from the educator side. So just know if I can get through it, so can you.
Amen to that. Man, this has been so good. I wish we had like a couple more hours to talk about this, because many gold nuggets in there. So many gold nuggets in there. So maybe we'll have you back. Who knows? But yeah, thank you again for taking the time to talk today and to share your experiences and everything. Where can people find you?
Yeah, so my most popular platform right now is Instagram. You can find me at The Functional Musician. Or you can hop on my website, thefunctionalmusician.com. I have a blog with a lot of free resources, and I have information for my recovery program on there. And I also post a lot of mobility routines on social media as well. So feel free to go check that out and just shoot me a little message and say hey.
Awesome. Well, you heard the man. Just go say hey to him, and we'll see you next time on another episode of Trust the Process. Take care. For listening into our conversation today. I hope you got as much out of it as I did. To see a full bio for our guest today, see the show notes or go to our website at trusttheprocesspodcast.com. Make sure you share this with a musician you care about who's going through injury, or a music educator in your life, or anyone just trying to make it in life. If you have a suggestion for a guest or topic to cover, shoot me an email at trustprocesspodcast@gmail.com or send me a message on Facebook or Instagram. Before we go, I just want to give a heartfelt thank you and shout out to my team, Daniel Baldwin, who is my audio engineer, Kevin West, who does all music and sound effects for the show, and my sister Dana Lovell, who created the logo and promotional materials. We wouldn't have this show without them. So tune in next time for another episode of Trust the Process.